All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us here for our webinar today on ransomware. Don't pay the bad guys. We got a great turnout today, so I'm really excited to get started. I will have some time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions as we go along, go ahead and use that Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. Put your question in there, and like I said, I will have some time at the end to respond to some of those questions live for you. Excuse me. Start out with a little bit about me. My name is Scott Miniman. I'm the Information Security Manager for Net Standard here at Overland Park, Kansas. I've been in IT for around 15 years or so. At one point in my life, I even took a little detour to go off to law school back east and became a trial attorney for a while. But now I'm back here doing IT again. In IT, I've done everything from in-house network support to virus cleanup, printer support, all the way up to consulting with CEOs, leaders like you on big picture strategy, roadmaps, budgets, you name it. Now I get to spend my time making Net Standard and our clients more secure, as well as doing some educational events like this. I want to start off today by talking first about SolarWinds. I know I told you this is a ransomware webinar, but trust me, it is relevant. As you probably heard, back in December, it was announced that the company SolarWinds had a backdoor in its Orion software. This allowed unknown hackers to break into many US government networks for months. Pretty much every government agency was affected. Treasury, state, Homeland Security, Justice, basically everyone. The damage to the government and to national security is really enormous, and the response is being led by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, I'm not sure how many of you actually use the SolarWinds Orion software, so it may not have affected you directly, but even if you don't use Orion, this hack is going to affect you in some ways that you may not be anticipating. First, there's probably going to be increased regulation. We all know this happens every time something major happens, and especially if it happens to the government. Some of it's already started. The National Defense Authorization Act, which was enacted right around the start of the year, contains 27 different cybersecurity provisions. For example, it creates a new national cyber director that reports directly to the president. It strengthens the cyber authority of Homeland Security and of CISA. It authorizes activities like a national cyber exercise to be performed between both public and private organizations. It calls for a study to find ways to improve the market for cyber insurance. And it also initiates a strategy to get all US-based email providers to implement stronger email security. So you can see the government is starting already to look to private companies to improve security for everyone. I'm predicting, though, that the most impactful regulation is probably still to come. We're all kind of waiting to see what that's going to be. But this SolarWinds incident and the ransomware that we're going to discuss here in a minute underscores one fact about IT security that has not changed and will never change. You own the risk. As business owners and as business leaders, you own the risk of a security incident happening that affects your business. You cannot eliminate this risk, you cannot transfer this risk, and you cannot ignore it. Ignorance is not an excuse. Now, this has always been true. Security breaches don't care if you knew that it was going to happen or not, but it's starting to get a new focus in light of the SolarWinds incident. There's a class action lawsuit out there right now against SolarWinds, claiming that its executives knew or should have known. But think about all these affected entities too. They may not have known about the risk of SolarWinds being used for an attack. They may have been totally ignorant to that risk, but they were still hit anyway. Ignorance is not an excuse and it will not protect you. Now, you can mitigate the risk using following best practices, implementing security controls, getting cyber insurance, partnering with an IT managed service provider. All these things can help mitigate and reduce your risk. But at the end of the day, the honest truth is that you cannot transfer this risk and you cannot eliminate it. One great way to help mitigate and reduce risk is by partnering with an IT provider like NetStandard. So let's talk for just a minute about what being part of our Clarity program gives you to help you out with your security. You get antivirus, anti-malware, patch management, external vulnerability scans, where we scan your firewall from the internet every month. You get quarterly reviews, help desk, tech support, things like that. You get help with your backups, or you can use our data safe backup. And probably most importantly, you get strategic advice and help from your Clarity CTO. You can think of Clarity as your daily IT operation. We do things every day to help take care of the basics, keep your people working, establish that baseline. For many of you, on a daily basis, that's enough. Follow best practices, use good passwords, keep your stuff up to date, don't run old hardware and software, don't click on weird emails, and you're pretty okay. For others of you, though, pretty okay isn't going to be good enough. Maybe your business needs more. And that's where you can layer on additional services, additional protections, sometimes even additional companies that are highly specialized in advanced security topics. It's a balance. It's always a balance between cost, need, and benefit. The equation is a little bit different for every company. You're all just a little bit different in ways that really matter when it comes to reducing your security risk. That's why we have the Clarity CTO to be able to listen to you, to understand what matters to your business, and to help you navigate this balancing act so that you have what you need without spending more than you have to. Now, with all that said, having all the ways that an IT provider can help protect you, all the advice and help you get from them, even with layers of additional protection, there's still a chance that something bad could happen to you. Remember earlier when I said you cannot eliminate the risk and you can't transfer it? This is what I'm talking about. We can do everything right, you can do everything right, and something might still happen. You will always and forever own some amount of security risk. The biggest risk to you is ransomware. Everyone is being affected by ransomware. It's hitting major companies like Garmin and Epic right here in KC. It's hitting small companies, companies just like you, maybe even some of you. I recently saw a statistic that between a third and a half of all ransomware attacks are against organizations smaller than 100 people. I don't care if you're 2 employees or 200,000 employees, if your revenue is 1 million or 100 billion, ransomware is coming for you. In terms of risk likelihood versus risk impact, it's the single most important IT security risk you have. If you're going to worry about something, don't worry about nation state attacks, corporate espionage, or vindictive former employees. Worry about ransomware first. So, what is ransomware? Ransomware is an attack where the bad guys get into your systems, they find your data, and they encrypt it all with a secret key to make it unusable. So imagine coming into work one morning, or in these pandemic times, you log in from home and finding out that you can't open up any files. The only file that you can open is this weird looking text file saying that you have to pay somebody money to get your files back. This is ransomware. It's really just old school extortion, and it works. There's so much money in it. The average ransom demand is $154,000, and there's more than one ransomware gang making over $100 million per year from all of the people paying the ransoms. Now, I know I just used the word gangs, but I kind of think that undersells it a little bit. Yeah, don't get me wrong, they are criminals, but the best ones are really more like businesses at this point. They have management structures. They hire and fire employees. They keep regular business hours in an office. They have partnership agreements with other groups. The old stereotype of a couple guys wearing black hoodies in a basement, hacking into things just for fun or because they can't get a real job, that stereotype doesn't apply anymore. That's not who you have to worry about. Worry about the professionals, the ones who do this for a living, getting paid a salary with benefits, working in specialized teams, getting tech support for their problems. Worry about the fact that they're so successful that they can set up like real businesses, and about the fact that they can do it so openly in their home countries because they know their local police are not coming for them. If this sounds like a little bit different message on ransomware than what you've maybe heard in the past, it's kind of because it is. The world changed this year, and just as SolarWinds changed the world for the government, ransomware changed it for you. It was a perfect storm this year, and it's led to an explosion in ransomware. Think about it. When everyone got sent home to work, security defenses weren't quite what they used to be. And when companies do get hit with ransomware, they often see paying the ransom as being the quickest way to recover. Plus, more companies than ever now have cyber insurance, which will often cover that ransom payment. So there's more attacks plus more willingness to pay equals more money than ever. And as I said a minute ago, there's more than one of these groups making over $100 million a year and growing. Imagine your company for a second and what you could do with $100 million a year. I mean, you could do basically anything, right? You could hire as many people as you want, take on new services, develop new products, take advantage of every market weakness you can find. That's what these people are doing. The threat to every one of your businesses is real. The only way to stop this tide is to cut off the money supply. They're doing it for the money, plain and simple. They're not doing it because they love it or because they hate America or anything like that. It's because there's a tsunami of money coming in and they all want to ride that wave. The old advice used to be when you get hit with ransomware, please, I'd prefer if you didn't pay them, but it can be the quickest way to get back on your feet. So I understand if you do want to pay. That's not the case anymore. If you get hit with ransomware, please do everything you can not to pay the ransom. If any of you have gone through this, you know what I'm about to talk about. They make it sound like if you pay the money, you'll get the decryptor program and you're good as new. This is a lie. In reality, more often than not, well, they really do give you the decryptor. I mean, they are like businesses after all, and they do tend to do what they say they're going to do most of the time. But what they don't tell you is that after you get the decryptor, you have to run every single file and folder through it. How many files and folders do you have? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? I've seen in my personal experience it take more than a week, working 24 hours a day to use a decryptor to restore everything. Now ask yourself, more than a week of downtime just to restore everything to the way it was a day before, after paying 5, 6, 7-figure ransom, is that really better than restoring from backup and rebuilding? And before you answer that, there's another piece that I haven't told you. If you pay them and you use their decryptor to recover, you haven't actually kicked them out of your network. Just because you paid them doesn't make them say, have a nice day and leave you alone in the future. You still have to actually find out how they got in and clean that up. Oftentimes, that means restoring and rebuilding anyway. Remember the very thing you chose not to do up front if you paid them. So now you paid, but you still have to rebuild anyway. So that's all pretty bad news, I know. And unfortunately, there's a piece that makes it even worse. So the attackers first get into your network, and then they encrypt everything. But that's not all. There's a period of time in between those two events. They don't do it immediately. In that time, they're doing two things. First, they're spreading to as many machines as they can. They're getting their hooks into everything they can find so that it's super hard for you to get them out. Second, they're finding your data and copying it out of your network to servers that they own. This is called data exfiltration, and it happens in up to 70% of all ransomware attacks. So they not only encrypt your data, they also just straight up steal it. And then that becomes part of the ransom too. If you don't pay, they threaten to release your data online. For some of you, that might not be a big deal, but for others of you, maybe you have personal or confidential information, that could expose you to fines, penalties, get you in some really serious trouble. There's even reports now that just came out since the start of the year that while they're in your network looking around, they're also looking specifically for executive computers and laptops. Many people, including executives, do personal things on their work computers, like personal emails, banking information, family pictures, stuff like that. They're specifically looking for these executive computers so that they can steal that personal information also and increase the pressure to pay the ransom. But remember, you're not supposed to pay the ransom. Like I said, it's not really faster to recover, and it really just fuels the fire. Remember, the average ransom demand is $154,000. And what's really interesting about that number is that it's down. At the end of Q3 last year, it was 233,000. And now, as of the end of Q4, it's down to 154. And it's because more victims are resisting and refusing to pay the ransom. But even so, there are still huge financial incentives for the attackers. Most of these people are from places like Eastern Europe, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. How far do you think $154,000 goes in those places, let alone 233,000? How many new attacks do you think they can fund on that much money? The biggest thing you can do to keep from paying the ransom is to have good backups. A full copy of everything that matters somewhere that isn't on your servers. If you can restore everything from backup, then there isn't as much need for you to pay them. It's critically important here that the backups be offline, not on the network, not accessible by anyone from any computer. This is because the attackers, during that period of time when they're looking for important things in your network, they're trying to steal your data, they're looking for your backups too. And if they find those backups, they will destroy them. Why wouldn't they? They want you to pay. So have a good backup of everything that matters and have it offline. There are a lot of backup systems that can take care of this for you, including one that we offer called DataSafe. But whatever it is that you use, make sure that it's ransomware proof. Don't forget about your critical workstations too. If you can't afford the time and effort it takes for workstations to be offline until they get rebuilt, then you probably need to think about having them backed up too. Now, this is kind of a newer thing. It's not something that was always done, but these days it's certainly something to consider. And then there's the cloud. For those of you that use cloud services like Microsoft 365, G Suite, Box, things like that that are often tied back to your on-premise environment, attackers are starting to look for that too. So make sure it's backed up. None of the cloud vendors include backup for free. You always have to get it separately as an additional line item or an additional service. What this means is if you don't know if you have backup on your cloud files, then you probably don't have it. And you should be asking some hard questions about that. So we talked earlier about some of the day-to-day basics, like keeping Windows patched, keeping antivirus on your computers, monitoring your backups, doing regular vulnerability scans. And really, honestly, those day-to-day basics take care of a lot of the real-world attacks out there. For example, the biggest attack vector out there is RDP, remote desktop. This accounts for nearly half of all attacks. If you recognize this window on the screen, that's remote desktop. If you have this exposed to the internet, you are putting yourself at risk. Attackers hack into remote desktop every single day. Like I said, it's the beginning of nearly half of all attacks. Historically, organizations would set up remote desktop over the internet for business reasons because it is really easy to use. I'm going to tell you these days, find a different way. It's such a huge risk, and it's gotten so much worse over the past year. If you have remote desktop on the internet, please find a way to deal with that today if possible. After remote desktop, the next biggest way that attackers get into your network is through email. Some recent statistics are starting to show email overtaking remote desktop as the #1 threat, but at the very least, they're both right there together. There are a lot of different pieces that all come together to help protect you against email. One is the antivirus on your computer, which hopefully you all have. If you get a malicious attachment and you try to open it, the antivirus is automatically scanning it for known threats. Another great option to help protect against email threats is using an email filtering solution. Email filtering protection can be very effective. You may know it as anti-spam, but really it's more than that now. Some of the better email filters can not only reduce the spam that you get, but can also check for malicious links, malicious attachments, can flag messages from known bad actors, and can even put warning messages on emails that come in from the outside to help warn your users to be careful. That's not, it doesn't stop everything for sure. And I mean, really, let's be honest, it's going to block legitimate emails once in a while. But if you can stop the most obvious ones, the 80, 90% or whatever, that's the low hanging fruit there, you've made yourself more secure and you've helped out your employees at the same time because they don't get as much junk. And plus, it's really not that expensive. It's very cost effective for the amount of risk reduction that you get. So to recap where we are, remote desktop and email are the top two ways that organizations get attacked. Number three is bugs and issues with the systems themselves. The obvious thing to do is patch. Keep up on current hardware and software. This is important even if the out-of-date system isn't reachable from the internet. Think about it. If something gets in through email, which is number two on our list, and makes it onto your computer, the attacker then tries to spread throughout the network, ultimately looking for your files, your databases, your domain controllers, all your real places of value. They do this mostly through bugs and issues with Windows, VMware, with the pieces that make up the majority of your systems. This is why patching is so important. As long as the systems are supported, Microsoft and others are releasing patches to fix these bugs. And all you have to do is make sure those patches get installed timely. So if an attacker gets onto your computer, they can't use those known vulnerabilities to spread onto your servers and other machines if they've been patched already. Which brings us to out-of-date hardware and software. It used to be okay to still run things like Windows 7, Server 2008, or even, God forbid, Windows XP, as long as those machines aren't exposed to the internet. That's not the case anymore. If an attacker gets onto your computer, you can be sure they will find those old machines on your network, which aren't getting patched anymore, and they're going to get into them too. And if out-of-date software is directly exposed to the internet, like on your web server, then really, let's be honest, it's only a matter of time until you're going to have a significant problem on your hands. So bottom line, when your IT person or whoever is telling you to upgrade those old operating systems, it's not just for fun, and it especially isn't to try to make you spend more money. It's a security issue, it's a real risk, and it's even more important than it has ever been. So those are some of the basics, the things that tend to apply to everyone. I'm sure some of you are sitting there thinking about your own environments, saying, yeah, but just keeping things up to date, not putting remote desktop on the internet, that's not really enough to fully keep me safe. There might still be some gaps, some other things that you need to worry about with your security. You're probably right. So let's talk about some ways that you can bridge those gaps. Quick side note before we get started, not all of these gaps are going to apply to everyone. In fact, there are very few of you that truly need every single thing I'm about to mention. It's not one size fits all. And when it comes to security, you really don't want it to be. In order to properly strike the right balance between security and being user-friendly, between cost and risk, you absolutely want to evaluate each element separately. Let's start by talking about email again. Remember from earlier, email is one of the two biggest ways that networks get compromised, and even the best email filters are not 100% accurate. Some things are going to get through. So when they do get through, make sure your users know what to look out for and what to do. There are two ways to train your users, and it's most effective when both are done together. First is anti-phishing training, where your users get sent phishing emails on purpose to see if they fall for it. If they do fall for it, they get a little training page showing them what went wrong so that they can learn for the future. Then you combine that with more traditional user training, things like videos, little quizzes, to give them some security awareness, help them understand more about security and how they can stay safe these days. Both the user training and the anti-phishing tests are incredibly effective, and the costs can kind of run the gamut. You can get super basic ones that cost almost nothing, or it goes all the way up to ones that have, Netflix quality videos, plot lines, super engaging, like very memorable kind of stuff. Just like with email filtering protection, user training can significantly reduce your risk at a very manageable cost, and I would very highly recommend looking into that. Now, with all of that being said, even with training your users, sometimes they're going to make mistakes. We're all human. It's okay. It happens. Even the best trained users sometimes click on something they shouldn't, or they'll reuse a password in two places, or one way or another, an attacker gets hold of their username and password. So use two-factor authentication. With two-factor authentication, even if an attacker gets someone's username and password, they can't use it to log in and start doing damage or cause ransomware. For those of you who might not be familiar, here's what two-factor authentication is. There are three ways to prove your identity. There's something you know, something you have, and something you are. Something you know is a password. You know your password. Something you have is a device of some type, usually your cell phone. Something you are is biometrics, like your fingerprint or a face scan. Two-factor authentication just means that it requires two of these. Usually it means your password and your phone. Most of us have encountered this somewhere already. You log into a website, you put in your username and password, and then it sends you a text message with a code that you then have to type in as part of that login process. That's two-factor authentication. And it means that even if an attacker gets your password, they can't log in unless they also have the code. Most of us have seen this on websites, but it's also possible to use it to protect your organization's network too. So even if one of your users makes a mistake and their password gets out, come on, we're all human here, then that mistake won't come back to bite you in a ransomware attack. Next, let's talk about your desktops and laptops. If you get breached, it's very likely that it's going to start with a desktop or a laptop. It's most of the machines you have, they're being used all day. It's no surprise that most attacks start with a computer, especially now that many computers are remote in people's homes. There are some things you can do here to kind of help beef up the security of these computers. One thing is DNS filtering. Now, it's a little bit technical, but bear with me here. Basically, everything that happens on the internet uses something called DNS. If you don't know what DNS is, don't worry. It's one of the back-end services that exists on the internet, and as long as it's working right, you really don't have to think about it. It's kind of like a phone book. Just like everyone has a phone number, every machine on the internet has a number too, called its IP address. That's how computers know each other, by their IP address number. But you don't know an IP address. You only know the name, like netstandard.com. So when you type in netstandard.com, DNS is the system that converts that into an IP address number so that your computer and the server know how to talk to each other. Because everything relies on DNS, we can use DNS to help filter out bad traffic. This is called DNS filtering, and it works like this. If something bad gets into your computer, maybe you clicked on the wrong email or whatever, then that bad thing is going to reach out to the internet to communicate with the attackers, get more instructions, do whatever bad thing it is that they're trying to do. That communication generally relies on DNS, and you can filter DNS to block some of that bad traffic. I'm telling you, it can be a really nice layer of defense. To really get to the next level of security, at some point, you have to start partnering with security specialists. There are firms out there that this is all they do. They don't do operations, they don't work on strategy. They just lock your stuff down with really advanced tool sets. tools that find things that regular antivirus won't catch. They assign 24/7 security analysts to monitor and analyze everything, really get into the nooks and crannies of all of your systems so that the minute something feels off, they're raising alarms and they're starting the lockdown. These are also the people that, if you do have a significant security incident, and remember, even if you do everything perfectly, you still own some risk of a security event happening. You can't fully eliminate that. These are the people that come in to help manage the response. This is what they do, and the good ones are really, really good at it. If you have cyber insurance, the insurance provider will probably cover a security incident response company. They'll usually require that you use a specific one, but they'll cover it. And if you don't have cyber insurance, well, you need to be looking into that. Finally, I have one more piece of advice to give you. I know there's been a lot of information thrown at you just now very quickly. If you've been taking notes, I'm sure your hand is cramping up by now. But where do you even begin with all of this? Let me give you an easy button. Before you dive into all these fuzzy questions about risk and reward, what's worth it or isn't, start with a business continuity plan. Having a business continuity plan and actually reviewing and testing it regularly will help focus all of these other questions into what's important real quick. A business continuity plan is simply just, if something really bad happens, how will our business keep operating? And not just from a technology perspective, but including things like physical space, public relations, finances. Trust me, you do not want to be figuring all of that out on the fly while you're in the middle of a catastrophe. Developing a good business continuity plan is going to necessarily include things like risk, response, and identifying what parts of your business matter the most. Then once you have that, now you can focus on those things that are the most critical and use some of these pieces I mentioned earlier to make sure you're providing the most value to your business. So if you don't know where to start, start here. And with that, I will open it up to any questions. Let's see what we've got. Okay, I've got a few here. What do we do if they steal data in a ransomware attack? How do we get it back? This is always a fun question because unfortunately there's not really a good answer here. The attackers are going to tell you as part of that ransom, if you pay, they'll delete the data and they won't leak it. I mean, there's no such thing really as getting it back, but the most you can try to get them to do is delete it so that it gets gone from their hands. Sometimes when you pay, sometimes they do that. There are documented instances out there, you can look them up, where people have paid and it got leaked anyway. They didn't live up to that promise. So there's not really a good answer for that there, and you definitely can't get it back. You can pay them and hope that they delete it, but really at the end of the day, like if it's gone, it's basically gone, unfortunately. Next question. Why do you say not everyone needs things like email protection? Doesn't everyone need that? Okay. Yes, everyone needs something to help protect their email. Just relying on people to be able to filter out all of the malicious stuff and the good stuff is ultimately going to fail at some point because we're all human. So you always need something. But why I said that the way that I said that is because the particular way that you protect your email could vary from company to company. Not everyone needs the same product, the same level of protection. Some people need it to be stronger. Some need it to be a little bit looser. Like, yeah, we're going to take a little bit more risk to let things through because we really can't afford for even one to get caught, something like that. Some people need different types of protection. There are protections that are, more black and white list based that tend to be a little bit cheaper. There are ones that are more, advanced, more heuristic, trying to learn from you, that tend to be a little bit more expensive, but there's different levels, different types, things like that. I do think everyone needs to have something protecting their email, but it's not always the same thing for everybody. So consider what that means for your organization. Next, do you have to include everything in your business continuity or backup strategy? No, you don't have to include everything, but when I was talking about the business continuity plan, I said it makes you walk through those questions of, what's most important, risk, what do you actually need in order to just keep the lights on? That's probably not going to be literally every single computer in your system. Most places could get by with only some of their systems. You're not going to be able to do everything. You're not going to be 100%, but you can keep the lights on. That's what a business continuity plan is going to do for you. It's going to help you focus in on the things that really, this computer over here, we could be without for, a couple weeks or whatever, but this one here, if it's down for 2 hours, we're in real trouble. It's going to help you identify those things so that you can put a different level of protection on the computer that's more critical. It's worth paying more attention to than the one that could be down for a couple weeks. Hopefully that makes sense. Uh, okay, and then the last question I've got right now, and again, feel free to contribute any more in the Q&A box. My main systems are all in the cloud, so I don't need to worry about ransomware. That's not correct. If all of your systems are in the cloud, maybe you don't have any servers on site. That's becoming more of a thing these days. All your files are in the cloud, all of your login, all of your systems, like everything is up there. You don't have anything, you don't have any traditional servers. Well, what happens is, because this is becoming more of a thing these days, when the attacker gets into your computer, they're going to know to look for that. Like, they're going to look not only for, hey, what servers are around me? I don't see any servers around me. That must mean things are in the cloud. Let's start looking for those connections. They'll find those connections, including to like 365, to Box, to G Suite, to whatever it is, and try to attack those too. So just because everything is in the cloud doesn't mean that you don't have anything to worry about. The attackers are going to find that, or they're going to try to anyway. So you want to make sure that it's backed up, like I said earlier, and cloud vendors don't tend to provide backup as a free thing. It's usually a separate line item, something additional that you have to make sure that you have. Make sure you have that and make sure that it's protected, so that if that attacker gets a hold of one of your laptops, one of your desktops, one of your endpoints, and they do try to use that to get into your cloud, that it's going to stop them. All right. Not seeing any further questions here. So thanks everyone for your time today. I hope you learned something useful, or at the very least, you have something to go back and think about. Definitely reach out to us if you want more information about anything we talked about here today. My email's up there on the screen. Special thanks today to Deanna Richard for coordinating this and making it all happen. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.